All right, it looks like we are live. Welcome to the show, everybody. Hope y'all are having a great day. Turk here, hope you're having a good one. Today is going to be an action-packed day. We've got so much to talk about, so let's just get straight to it. We've got 3 different topics to cover today because you guys voted over on the community tab that y'all wanted some really dense topics. So today we're going to be talking about the VRAM hysteria that's going on. Do GPUs these days need to have more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM, or can we get away with just 8 gigabytes? We're going to be definitely talking about that. And then right on the heels of that one, we're going to be talking about this weird space that PC gaming's currently in. We're going to be talking about the transition of the space and how it's kind of migrating and changing right underneath our feet, and ways that you guys can better, put yourself in a good perspective. That way you're not disappointed with future updates from GPUs or CPUs, or even games that are going to be releasing in the next not 24 hours, but the next, 1 to 2 to 3 years. And then last, of course, we got to throw a softball to our handheld friends. We're going to be talking about the differences and if you should pick up a PC handheld device or just get a budget gaming laptop. There's plenty of angles to look at from that perspective, so we're going to talk about that towards the end of the stream. So I appreciate all of y'all coming by. I hope y'all are having a great day. This is going to be a very technical stream, got lots of data to show to you, so definitely stay put, get yourself a drink. I got myself a cup of coffee ready to go. Let's go with topic number 1, the VRAM hysteria. You guys saw the thumbnail. I actually ripped it kind of off of Hardware Unboxed, where they did a video talking about 8 gigabytes versus 16 gigabytes, and if we should be worried that current generation graphics cards, as well as previous generation, mid-range graphics cards, really should have came with more VRAM attached to them. So I wanted to do a deep dive into this topic because just watching that one video, you would think it's all doom and gloom when it comes to, getting yourself a 3070 or you got a 6600 XT. You might think 8 gigabyte cards are dead. Well, in all honesty, they're still pretty good, and they're pretty reliable, and they're still alive and kicking. So there's a lot of different variables when it comes to talking about VRAM and the different type of fail states that we saw in that video. We'll talk more about that video, but I wanted to kind of walk our way through these variables instead of just, throwing it all into the pile and trying to find out why we failed for some reason. So the first and most glaring variable that I see when it comes to VRAM and the whole hysteria that's going on is, of course, your resolution. If you're a modern PC gamer, or even consoles at this point, we got 3 different resolutions that we typically play at. We got 1080p, 1440p, and 4K as our display outputs. But there's also some trickery that goes on behind the covers in some different games. There's different upscaling technologies and all that sort of thing. And each of those different variables within resolution itself can impact the VRAM requirements that are required in a game. Let me make sure I'm sure. Yep, I'm on the right screen. So cool. So I actually have 2 different games that I want to focus on when it comes to resolution. And the first one is going to be Spider-Man Remastered. We picked up this game a while back. It's a pretty good game. I've had fun. My kids have been playing it a lot. And if you've watched some of the other videos about VRAM, a lot of people have noticed that that one's pretty heavy. When I ran it on my RTX 3070 at 4K, 1080p, and 1440p, I didn't really see as much issues as a lot of other people. So let's pop open a video real quick, throw it up to the screen. All right, that's a different chart. We'll definitely talk about that later. So here we have not Skyrim. I was watching a Bethesda leak video right before this. But here we have Spider-Man Remastered at 4K, and it's currently running right around 60 FPS, which is actually really good for the RTX 3070. But up at the top left, you probably can't see it too well. You might have to like zoom in or squinch. It's not actually running into any VRAM issues right now. In this current state, we've got a lot of different textures going on, and the system has only allocated 7,500 megabytes or so for the VRAM usage, which is less than the total capacity for the RTX 3070. And what's really interesting here is we're also using right around 6,800 megabytes of RAM. That's the actual usage that's going on in the RAM, and typically that allocation number will be larger than the used number, but you want that out. Sorry for the blip there. You want that, oh, because that's running 1440p. Stop. You're getting ahead of the game. You want the actual usage number to be drastically less than your allocated number, but that allocated number up at the top left, it can get pretty close to the 8 gig, and I've seen it even go above that. So at 1080 or at 4K, we're not hitting any VRAM issues with Skyrim. I did it again. Spider-Man Remastered. So let's take a look at Spider-Man at 1440p. Again, we've already seen this, but you see that the VRAM requirements haven't really changed all that much. We're running right around 7,300 megabytes on the allocated VRAM, and we're actually consuming 6,700 megabytes. But you'll also notice our frame rates have nearly doubled to about 104 FPS, which is mighty fine for 1440p on an RTX 3070. So that's pretty good. Next up is Spider-Man at 1080p. And here again, frame rate is 140 FPS, which is stellar. We're going to be gaming on our high refresh rate monitors. But that VRAM number still hasn't budged all that much. 7,200, 7,240 for the allocated, and 6,625 for the actual in-use numbers. And that is pretty interesting, because what that tells me, of course it goes back to 4K, it tells me that the VRAM here, it's not as dynamic as what we would typically see in a particular video game. So this engine doesn't have as much impact when it comes to the resolution choices you have towards your VRAM budget. But at 4K, this is all at the highest resolution, not the highest resolution, at the highest quality settings. We're not hitting any issues on our RTX 3070. So I think this is a good indication of the top end of what would be a pretty decent experience. We've got other games to show, but the next, I wanted to take a look at Resident Evil 4. This is a very heavy game. I think Hardware Unboxed also mentioned it in their video. But here we have at Resident Evil 4K, I think this is the ray tracing preset. It's not the preferred graphics or whatever. This is the ray tracing preset. And here we have 7,200 megabytes allocated for the 4K resolution and 6,200 as the actual usage. Now, you might have to squint even closer. There's another number I want you guys to take a look at, and that's this percentage up at the top left. That is the PCIe bus utilization number. Ideally, you want that number to be as close to 0 as possible, but what happens in the system is when the system's trying to change assets in from actual system RAM into graphics VRAM, that PCIe bus does get utilized quite a bit. We'll run into some instances there, but keep in mind that particular number. Next up, 1440p Resident Evil. Again, we're decreasing our resolution, and we're getting 92 FPS here, which is really good. I think I measured 86 on my notes here, but you'll notice the VRAM requirements have dropped significantly. Our allocated VRAM now is at 5,700, and the used number is just at 4 gigabytes, which don't let that fool you into thinking a 4 gigabyte graphics card will work at 1440p. No, that's nowhere close. But this does give us plenty of headroom when it comes to running Resident Evil at 1440p. Next up, 1080p. We see the same scenario here, 5,300 on the megabytes for utilization. That's this first column, second row. And the usage is at less than 4 gigabytes. So in this particular game, we actually do see our VRAM requirements change drastically based on our output resolution selected. Now, I also wanted to see what happens when we change the internal resolution using the FSR technology within the game. Sorry, Spider-Man, you're gonna have to wait for a second. Let's look at Resident Evil 4 FSR at off. Again, we're running right around 7 gigabytes on the allocated here, and we're running at 51 FPS or so. This is not like actual in-game FPS for like when you're shooting zombies and all that, but this is indicative of the scaling we would expect. Next up, we've got 4K FSR at quality mode. You'll notice we got that FPS bump. We're now at 66, 65. And our VRAM did decrease just a bit. It wasn't a lot, but it's a little bit less than the 7 gigs or so we had at the beginning. Next up is FSR balanced. We do get yet another slight decrease in our texture or VRAM allocation. We're now just below the 6 gig number, which is pretty good. Our performance is also pretty good at 74 FPS. Balanced at 4K is kind of like my threshold of quality. I don't know if you guys will see it in the stream or not, but this is usually the top end of what I would say is graphically acceptable for me. Next up, FSR in performance mode. Let's throw that on the screen. Now, this is where we start to get a little moody. We still do get some VRAM. We do reduce our VRAM allocation quite a bit here as well. We're now around 5,800 megabytes, but we do get that performance boost. So if you like that kind of quality, you'll be able to run it on your RTX 3070, which is only an 8 gigabyte VRAM card. So again, this is not terrible performance when it comes to our resolutions. Last up, this is ultra performance. Highly do not recommend it with FSR 2, but it's there if you want it. We still do get a little bit less VRAM utilization, which is expected at this point. And I think overall, we've kind of identified that, let's actually throw Spider-Man back up. That looked pretty good, didn't it? Oh, that's Resident Evil. Let's throw Spider-Man back up at 4K. That looks really good. This is at the very beginning of the game. I haven't even changed out my costume yet. I've got another save, so don't hate me. Don't hate me, guys. But what I can tell from all this, the 2 games that we looked at here, is changing our resolution can have an impact on our VRAM allocation as well as our usage. So you're going to have to tinker with the games that you play and see how that impacts your 8 gigabyte graphics card and if it's going to actually impact the performance of your card. Now, the next topic I wanted to talk about is, of course, the quality of the game. Now, I've brought this up in another section of this video. Let me pull up the webpage. Hardware Unboxed did a very good video where they talked about this 8 gigabytes versus 16 gigabytes. And they talked about a whole bunch of different games that had all sorts of different issues when they ran the RTX 3070 against the 6800. Not the 6800 XT, but just the 6800. Now, I think it was a pretty good video. I really liked the results that they showed, but I think some of the results they showed aren't necessarily, indicative of the actual card's issues, but I think it's more of a representation of the issues of the games themselves. And primarily, the first one is going to be The Last of Us. The Last of Us just came out, had a very rocky launch, and everyone was having performance issues. I think Hardware Unboxed had this video produced after the first or second patch, and judging by this one chart, the performance is not great. The 1% lows are terrible, which is very indicative of the VRAM issue that they were observing.
Work could be done here.
That's loud. I didn't mean to do that. Let's mute this tab so we don't do that again. But yeah, so later in the video, they show gameplay footage of the 6800 performing very well in the game, but the 3070 is stuttering all over the place. But what they don't tell you is that there's actually an issue with this game. I follow a person over on Twitter, goes by the name of Charlie, or Ghost Motley, and he was doing some investigation. Do I have this on the big screen? Let's go. And what they were noticing is that when you go into the settings menu in the video game, there's a little blocked out portion of the chart where they show like the OS and applications, and this is all VRAM that's reserved. If you, I'll probably post this tweet into the description of this video. But what they were noticing is that based on the type of graphics card you were running, the game will use a certain percentage of that as dedicated VRAM for the system. And if you've got an 8 GB card, that's going to allocate already 1.6 gig or reserve 1.6 gigabytes of your system VRAM for the operating system, which is overkill. And that only gives you about what, 6.4 gigabytes of space for your VRAM. If you saw our results from Spider-Man or even Resident Evil 4 just a minute ago, we're clearly already over allocating our VRAM budget. So in the last couple of weeks, The Last of Us, I think it was Naughty Dog, I think it was a different studio that actually made the port. They did release a new patch that actually fixes this issue. So I wanted to retest this and kind of do the exact same area of the map that Hardware Unboxed was benchmarking, as well as the same settings, and show you guys what's actually happening within the game. So let's pull that up real quick. I hope y'all are enjoying the stream. This is a little bit different than the way we usually do videos, but I think it's going to work out pretty good. So here we have The Last of Us. We're running this at 4K, and this is going to be at the high quality setting. This is where Hardware Unboxed said things would look pretty good. Up at the top left, we are running our benchmark loop. We're collecting data, and this RTX 3070 is getting, 62 FPS. The 1% low is kind of low. It's right around 39 to 40 FPS. But guys, it's nowhere close to what they were showing in their charts and their performance data, which I think is an excellent indicator that we are getting better performance. In terms of VRAM allocation, we are using 6.3 gigabytes of VRAM with the high quality setting, which is still pretty high, but it's not going to kill us, right? So 5.7 gig on the actual utilization. And again, up here at the top left, we have our PCIe utilization. So this game is much more intense when it comes to streaming assets in and out of system RAM in order to feed the graphics card. So now let's go to 1440p with the Ultra preset. And this is also running with ray tracing turned on. This is the exact same scenario that Hardware Unboxed was running, where they were getting all the stutters. Guys, the problem's not there anymore. The game itself was actually busted and it wasn't working properly. The 8 gigabyte limitation on the RTX 3080 is not what is actually impacting the performance with these settings. So I gotta say, Hardware Unboxed did a good job of what they were reporting, but they were pointing the finger at the wrong issue. It wasn't necessarily the graphics card, but it was in fact the game. The game got patched and it's getting good performance. We're getting right around a little bit less than 60 FPS, 54 on average right here, and 46 for the 1% lows. Pretty good, I would say, for the RTX 3070. But I wanted to see what we could do to actually break this, right? Because there was something that was broken with the game. I wanted to see if there was something that would actually break it. And it turns out there's a single setting that actually will cause this game to start hitting that same VRAM situation, and that is the texture streaming rate. I think at Ultra, it may be high or Ultra, I don't know what the detail setting is off the top of my head, but there's 3 different settings. There's 1.0 times, 1.25 times, and 1.5 times. That's going to actually tell the game how fast and how big of chunks of memory that it should be swapping in and out of system RAM at any given time. And I found that the 1.25 or the 1.5, I'm not exactly sure, but one of those 2 settings will actually cause your system to over allocate its system RAM and will impact performance with this game. So right now we're running right around 7.4 gigabytes on the allocated space, which is within our VRAM budget, excuse me, and we're running with an actual usage of 6.6. So I think this game is totally playable. I played all the way up to this point with Ultra settings at 1440p at with ray tracing turned on. After the patch, things were looking fine. So keep that in mind when you're playing games. Not necessarily the graphics card that's busted, but it is in fact the game itself. Case in point, I posted a short to my YouTube channel a while back. This is Hogwarts Legacy. Hardware Unboxed did a good job on analyzing this game. I think this is their second video where they looked into this. But in this particular game, it's not a great game. The game will actually start to push textures in and out of VRAM in order to try and minimize the impact of the performance when it comes to a fluid gameplay. And they just keep shuffling in the textures, especially when you're in Hogsmeade. So clearly this type of game and the quality of this game is not good when it comes to 8GB graphics cards. You can actually, and I mentioned it in the short, I'll post a link down in my description. When you actually change this to the high quality setting, that's what this is on right now, everything goes away. You can even turn ray tracing on at the high quality setting. Things look good. There's a couple textures that are a little bit worse here and there, but it's nowhere as bad as the ultra quality setting for the 8GB graphics card. So Hogwarts Legacy, still a pretty bad game. I think it's sold about 15 million copies though. So this wasn't an issue enough to make people not buy the game. So definitely worth, checking out if you've got the game. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry too much about it. All right, the last game I want to take a look at is the Callisto Protocol. Let's pull up Hardware Unboxed's video real quick. We're still on the right screen. They did a brief look at the Callisto Protocol, and of course we got advertisements. Boom, there we go. So in the Callisto Protocol, they actually showed pretty decent results with the ultra quality setting, but when they went into ultra quality plus ray tracing, that's when things started to go belly up with the RTX 3070. Yep, you can see it clearly there. 44 FPS at 1080p and 11 FPS at 1440p with the RTX 3070. And I wanted to make sure that this was still real. You know, with The Last of Us, we noticed it got fixed in a different patch. Hogwarts Legacy is still busted. So I was really curious what happens with this game. And sure enough, I have a tweet when I was doing some digging. I actually identified that when you go into the game, make it up to a certain point, exit out, and if you load back into the game with your high quality settings, the game will work just fine. It's going to load the assets in that it needs, but as soon as it starts to get into an area that's new or an element that you haven't encountered on the screen happens, that's when the system fails to actually exchange the VRAM with system memory and the graphics card. And that is what's inducing the problems with the game and the stuttering and issues. So again, it's not necessarily the 8GB limit. It's the fact that the game is not properly allocating its memory assets appropriately, and it's even failing to recover that. So I did capture some of this video. Let's throw it up real quick. This is the Callisto Protocol at 1440p with the ultra quality settings. Now this is in the exact same spot that Hardware Unboxed uses for their benchmarking sessions. A performance up at the top left, we're in the 70s, guys. This is actually pretty decent. Our memory utilization is at 6 gigabytes and we're only using 5 gigabytes. So we are in a very playable section of the game, and this is perfectly fine. I went through my normal little benchmark run and things were looking good all the way back to my little prison cell. So I thought, okay, if 1440p is not going to do it, before we get there though, you'll notice we're at 6 gigs of VRAM now and only still using 5.5 gigabytes of actual memory usage. So I wanted to pop up 4K real quick. It's our same little benchmark loop. Our texture assets haven't changed. The section of the map hasn't changed. And overall, the scene itself is still the same. We're only allocating 7.3 gigabytes of VRAM here and using 6.4. So we're getting close to our full capacity, but we haven't gone past it. As we go through the rest of this little, out and back, nothing new is actually occurring on the scene. All the textures are popping in and filling in appropriately. So now I wanted to add ray tracing. And this is where things start to get really interesting. Notice how the textures are not popping in on his bed, but the performance is still okay. We're at about 30 FPS here, which 4K ultra ray tracing on an RTX 3070 is not good. Now we're starting to see the issues with the VRAM. We're over allocating. We're past 7.6 gigabytes of allocation and 6.9 gigabytes of actual usage. This is what Hardware Unboxed was noticing, because if you don't properly flush the VRAM out of your system and reload the game, the system's never going to be able to recover from this particular state. Oh, of course, it goes back to Spider-Man. So I was really curious if I change the resolution down, now that we've got the ray traced ultra texture stuff loaded into memory with the Callisto protocol, can I get it to pass when I run at 1440p? And this is what you're going to find really interesting. So the textures didn't pop in time, but that's okay. It's not unheard of, but it's not ideal. Our performance is significantly worse than what we were seeing with 1440p at ultra. I think we were around 80 or 90. So our ray tracing has triggered in. We have not triggered the VRAM event. Remember, that's right around 7.6 gigabytes or so. And as we look around, everything's looking good. We've seen that effect before. But now I wanted to run the theory. What happens when we run into a new area of the map that we haven't seen before while running in this extreme case? We're at 7.4 gigabytes of allocated, 6.7 of actual used VRAM. And there we go. That's how you break this game. All you have to do is run into a piece of the area that the game doesn't have the texture assets in place for. We're nowhere near any of our actual VRAM usage numbers, and we're already triggering the game to go into the stutter fest. So again, it's not necessarily the 8 gigabytes card's fault that it's failing. It's the fact that the game can't properly manage its graphical assets and purge unneeded things or add needed assets in order to get the game working properly. So we've identified what happened when it comes to the quality of the game. Excuse me. I don't typically talk this much for a standard video, so I appreciate y'all being here. We'll check out some of y'all's comments here towards the end of the segment. We still have a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, but we've identified that some of these games really have issues when it comes to actually utilizing VRAM and how they recover from it and how they can kind of bypass or work around these issues. But the last thing I wanted to bring up is the actual graphics card's horsepower. And let's be honest, guys, most 8 gigabyte graphics cards can't really run the types of configurations that Hardware Unboxed and some of these other outlets are actually trying to benchmark. So I went on to Tech Power Up and I picked up all of the different kind of modern era graphics cards and documented all of the cards that are less than, are the cards that were just below that new 10 gigabyte, 12 gigabyte standard and see kind of where at least this news outlet thinks these kind of cards perform. And one thing you'll notice is that all of the different AMD cards, all the way from RDNA 2, RDNA 1, and even the GCNs, they're only really marked as completely good or excellent. I forget what they color code green to. They're only really good up to 1080p. Going up to 1440p, very few of the GCN cards, the RX 580, very common 8 gigabyte card, not exactly a 1080p card, let alone a 1440p card. Going into RDNA 1, the 5700 XT was a very good, capable card of its time, but it's only kind of marginally at 1440p. And then going up into RDNA 2, as much as I like the 6600 XT, I've done some videos here on the channel talking about how that's kind of similar to a PlayStation 5 in terms of performance. It's barely, you know, excellent. I forget, again, I don't remember what the color codes are, but it's not really meant to be running at 1440p, even if the marketing material says it can. That's where the NVIDIA cards really start to slip up. So down here towards the bottom, we've got the 2000 series of cards. There's plenty of cards that have 8 gigabytes or 6 gigabytes that are excellent and can play 1080p perfectly fine, at least according to this outlet. And what you'll notice is a lot of these 8 gigabyte cards from the 2000 series are marginally good at 1440p. And really the only card that's actually good nowadays would be the 2080 Ti. I do have an RTX 2080 Super if y'all guys want me to check that out in another video. But NVIDIA kind of got away with it with the RTX 2000 series because games back then didn't really utilize the full 8 gigabyte buffer. 4K wasn't necessarily popular. It was definitely marketed, but it really wasn't a super selling point, at least for this grade of hardware. You know, for the 2080 Super and the 2080, those were marketed as 4K cards, but the 2070 Super, 2060 Super, they weren't really marketed like that. And that's why the RTX 3000 series gets into such hot trouble. The RTX 3060, ironically, has a 12 gigabyte card, which people, I watched a video, I wonder if I have it up on here. Let me make sure, yep, I got the right one. I think I have that video up. Yep, this one. This is from Coil Wine, where they test the 3060 versus the 3070, and the 3060 has 12 gigabytes of RAM, and in Doom Eternal, they're able to play at 4K DLSS Ultra Nightmare for all the settings with the 3060, but not the 3070. So definitely recommend you guys check this video out. Coil Wine's a pretty solid channel. It's a smaller channel just like me, so definitely go show them some love if you're here on the channel. But that's why this third generation of RTX cards, excuse me, or I guess it would be it'd be second generation RTX, right? Because there was no RTX 1000, that was GTX. Anyways, that's a different topic. Anyways, a lot of these RTX 3000 series cards are capable of 1080p and 1440p. The 3070, ironically here, isn't really meant to be 4K. It can play it at 4K, but as we've seen in some of the games up to this point, you know, it's not really powerful enough to have a very fluid, at least 60 FPS experience. And that's why I think the 3070 Ti, excuse me, needs to see a lot more flack, because it's got the horsepower, but it's just losing its chops when it comes to 8 gigs. And then last thing I want to mention before we show some video, you got to also keep in mind, these cards were almost released 3 years ago. The RTX 3070 was announced back in 2020, September 1st, and it was launched at the end of October. So it's about 2.5 years old. Now, I know we want our mid-range cards to last, we want our mid-range cards to last longer than 2.5 years. But as we'll talk about in the next segment of this stream, you know, we're just in this really weird spot where games are changing at such a pace that very few in the industry kind of expected it to bypass, you know, some of the standards and norms we had in the past. You know, Hardware Unboxed called it, so thumbs up to them. But a lot of other people didn't think it was as big of an issue back in the day. So GPU horsepower, what else do I mean by that? Let's throw up, do I have video for that? I don't think I did. Oh yeah, because I did a short on it. Let me pull it up real quick. So I actually put up another short on the channel, I'm trying to get to the right window, where I actually go and explain why these VRAM issues are happening. So at 4K at high quality settings, Cyberpunk runs very well. It runs about 30 FPS, which is not great for a PC gaming experience, but on the RTX 3070, it's at least doable. But you'll also notice, you'll probably have to zoom in or go a lot closer to your window. We have allocated at this point 8 gigabytes of our VRAM for use with the game, and we're using 7.8 gigabytes of space, which is clearly past our VRAM limits. And you'll notice that percentage point, remember I mentioned it at the beginning, that 27%, that's our PCIe utilization. That's how much traffic is going on between the CPU and the GPU in order to transfer some of these rates out at speed in order to get the information to the game and as fast as possible. And that's why this particular game fails. It's getting caught up with compressing, uncompressing, and all that data transfers, and the bandwidth is just not high enough and it's not fast enough in order to accommodate. So long and story of it, as much as we want to play 4K 60 FPS with ray tracing turned on, I think it was ray tracing medium here, we're already 30 FPS. We're pushing beyond the capability of the graphics card. So we do have to make some accommodations in order to get to that point into a playable state. 1440p, great place to go. Run some DLSS, that's also another good place. So I don't really fault the graphics card for failing in this particular condition. It's because the game is just so hard to play. And the last game I want to talk about is Plague Tale Requiem. So I've never played this game before, but I did want to see what would happen. So I pulled up, I did these kind of out of order when I did the recording, but this is Plague Tale Requiem 1440p at ultra settings. Here we are. I think this is like after the first little intro. We're just at 60 FPS here. So most might consider this to be like the borderline threshold of it being fast enough to play as a PC gamer. And you'll notice we're at 7.6 gigabytes of allocated VRAM and 6.8 of used VRAM. So this game on this graphics card, 1440p ultra settings, is already pushing up into known limitations of both playability as well as serviceability of the graphics card. Once we bump it up to RT Ultra as well, that's where we start to run into issues again. We're already over allocating our VRAM usage. We're above 8 gigs now. There might be some, I think it's 8192 is the actual limit. So, don't quote me on it though. But we're already allocating more than we're supposed to be, and we're using 7.1 gigabytes here. So 1440p, ultra quality, with ray traced shadows, I believe. It's just way too much for this type of game and way too much for this type of card. So we're really asking too much out of our lowly RTX 3070. But what I find extremely interesting, if we bump our quality settings down to high and we leave ray tracing turned on, we're getting a solid 50 FPS or 45-ish, which is, again, still not great. It's not a 60 FPS standard that most PC gamers would like, but it's at least smooth and fluid. So by dropping our quality settings down just a tad, we're getting effectively the exact same experience, but at a much more fluid frame rate. Again, we're still allocating right around 7 gigabytes, only using about 5.8. So this is a much more legitimate configuration to run the RTX 3070 in, rather than throwing the hardest configs and the hardest quality settings at the graphics card and expecting it to work. That's not a very fair situation to put a mid-range graphics card in. But that could be debated down in the comments. So with all that said, I do have some final thoughts when it comes to the VRAM debate, and it kind of references a lot of the stuff we've talked about already. So the first thing, in my opinion, 8GB cards aren't necessarily bad. They're not the boogeyman that everyone needs to be worried about, but we do need to acknowledge and live within the limits of the 8GB card. Just as I showed a minute ago, wrong button, there we go. There are plenty of good current generation 8GB cards, and there's several that are about to be announced in this next month. I think AMD is about to announce their RX 7600, sorry. That's an 8GB card according to the leaks. And then NVIDIA is also going to be releasing their RTX 4060 Ti. Again, another 8GB card. So are these cards going to be similar to an RTX 3070? Or should we expect to treat them like a 6700 XT? Those are cards that are about equal in performance, potentially, but these new ones will have lower VRAM limits. So why is AMD and NVIDIA putting themselves up to that sort of, failure, right? Well, it's because 8GB isn't as bad as everyone seems to say. We do have to live within our limitations, and there's plenty of people on the market that would love to have a good, fast 8GB card. So we shouldn't, stigmatize 8GB, but we do need to keep our limitations. What's next? Yes, next, quality settings. We kind of alluded to that with the Plague Tale Requiem. Again, I haven't played that game a lot. But I would like to echo another popular YouTuber known as Tech Deals that gaming should be done at the high quality setting and screenshots should be done at the ultra quality setting. Now, I know why a bunch of different outlets like to benchmark at ultra quality settings because it definitely hammers your GPU to the utmost end. But going down to high or even medium in some games is going to give you a better performance, and that typically translates into a better gaming experience. And I love to watch Digital Foundry's videos and their optimization videos. There are many instances where they don't recommend running the ultra quality settings, especially in the particular sub settings, because they have no actual visual improvement, but they have a huge performance cost attached to it. So if you're going to be using your 8GB card or thinking about buying an 8GB card, you can't just be lazy, guys, and just throw everything to ultra, put everything to the max, and just expect it to perform that well, because sometimes the games themselves aren't built that way, and sometimes the cards aren't really in a good state to run it in that type of an experience. So you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, when in all reality, going with high or going with medium is a much better alternative than just, thinking PC Master Race. We got to set everything to high or ultra, right? So we can't be lazy anymore. We got to, dial our settings back quite a bit. And I also wanted to say here, if we wanted to factor in ray tracing, if you're thinking that technology improves your visual quality that much, maybe skimping on some of the quality settings or dialing back your resolutions via upscaling and all that, maybe that's a decent compromise for your 8GB graphics card. So I definitely think there's some options that you can live with and get a pretty good gaming experience. Excuse me. Man, I just don't talk as much, man. We talked about that. Oh, last one, of course. 8GB cards still have some life left with them, and that is due to some of the upcoming technologies. Now, if you follow me over on Twitter or you've watched some of my other videos here on the channel, there's a couple different technologies that are coming around the corner. Primarily direct storage. I've been harping on that quite a bit. The one thing I'm really concerned with on direct storage, we have gotten Forspoken that's coming out, and it does implement direct storage, but it's not all that great. So we definitely need to fine tune that a bit better and get better at that implementation. But this new, I think this was released or announced just this past couple days. NVIDIA has a new technology or technique that they might be able to compress some of the textures to get it to fit better, using some of their AI and their deep neural networks in order to compress and kind of like DLSSize their textures. So definitely recommend reading up on those. If y'all want to see me do a video on that, let me know down in the comments. What else do we want to talk about on VRAM? Oh yeah, we mentioned some of the newer cards that are coming out. We don't really need to say that. Basically, their 8GB cards are good enough for 1080p gaming. There's very few instances of running at ultra textures and ultra high quality settings with ray tracing where 1080p is actually going to break your 8GB card. So if you still game at 1080p, it's completely feasible to still be doing that on an 8GB card. The problem is once you get into 1440p or even into 4K, definitely recommend you guys pick up a 10 or 12GB card, or if there's some mid-range cards that AMD will hopefully announce soon, hopefully get those out so we can play higher quality settings, higher resolutions, and higher frame rates. So that's what all I've got to say about the VRAM issue. Let's see if anyone's commented in the live stream. Doesn't look like it. We'll be posting a lot of this stuff towards the end of the video, but I appreciate you guys sticking to the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll catch you in the next one. But stay put. We still have another topic to cover here on the live stream because there's a lot of stuff going on in the industry. I don't talk this much. Whew. But yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed that VRAM thing. That was a very dense video. A lot of stuff to talk about, but I think we covered it pretty well. We're not talking about that just yet. Oh yeah, we're going to pivot over to here. All right, so the next topic today is the changing tides of talking about PC gaming at large. So if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, I have been of the opinion that things are changing in a way, and this last generation of gaming consoles have definitely spurred and pushed a lot of us towards a new paradigm level. Sorry, my bitrate was really weird on the card. Going into this next generation of this next generation of consoles has kind of made the transition to higher end gaming consoles a bit harder, and it has kind of caught us off guard, especially with 2020 hitting us, and we haven't been able to update our graphics cards as fast as we would have liked, or being able to keep up with all the different releases. So right now PC gaming is in this transition space where we still have a lot of users that are using older generation hardware. Think GTX 1000, RTX 2000, RDNA 1, RDNA 1 based cards, even maybe some of the GCN cards, and it's just not able to keep up with what the developers are releasing. So I wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of not a history lesson, but kind of give you guys what the market and the industry have been doing when it comes to the resolutions that we like to game at, because it kind of gives us a bit of an indicator of, where we've been and why this has been so hard. So back in the 2010s, I'm going to have to explain this chart. I walk through this a lot better in the video I have here on my channel talking about this, but this is a survey result from a prominent online outlet in Germany where they actually ask their readers to tell them what their gaming resolutions are every year or 2 year, and they like to separate things out by mainstream gamers, mid-range gamers, and then high-end gamers. And each year they try to kind of level set their readers as to what's considered mid-range or what's considered high-end. Because like here in 2010, mid-range gamers were still running sub 1080p panels on their computers, and then high-end gamers were only starting to embrace 1080p. So back in 2010, there was a certain grade of hardware that was considered good, and another grade of hardware that was high-end or whatever. And as we go into 2016, this is kind of when, I think it was just before the RTX 2000 series was launched. That was back in 2020, right? Yeah, we talked about that a moment ago. But back in 2016, you could see that a lot of the mid-range gamers were using 1080p panels, and some of the mainstream people were still stuck on we're still stuck on 1080p panels. But here in the high-end space, you had people that were starting to play at 4K and others at 1440p. So there was that slow transition into these higher-end resolutions. And going into, this is 2019, clearly on the high end, people were playing at 1440p, 1080p was still hanging around in the mainstream, but in mid-range, it was more 1440p. But what you'll notice, once we put everything into a bigger perspective, mainstream, I mean, you can't really see it because of my head, but mainstream gamers have been stuck at 1080p for so long that now that we have this current generation of gaming consoles that are out, that are advertising 4K gameplay, they usually play anywhere between, 1440p and 1800p. This entire, I'll move my head out of here for a second. This entire segment here is going to be inverted in the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to see more mainstream gamers playing at 1440p and 4K, while the mainstream or the mid-range and the high end, there's nowhere else for these people to go without dropping massive amounts of cash to get RTX 4090s, RTX 4080s. So we're kind of pigeonholing our entire PC gaming user base into 1440p types of hardware, while still not having access to hardware that is cheap enough, that is good enough. A lot of people like to crap on the RTX 3060, 6500 XT was a whole bunch of memes. But those are the types of cards that mainstream PC gamers used to like for quite a while. Now those cards are going to be kind of irrelevant going forward. Of course, a Linus Tech Tips ad pops up. This guy can't leave my life alone. And this is according to the Steam hardware survey. This is going to be an even bigger change because as we start to get into these newer graphics card releases, where are all these 1080p monitors going to go? They're all going to go into the 1440p bin. So it's like we're in this narrow hallway where accessibility to the gaming hardware, as well as the playability of that hardware, it's just there's not a lot of options that are both inexpensive and good value. So I really think we're in a hard spot here. Yeah, so I can expand on that a little bit more. I got some notes here that I'm reading. We'll go back to this chart. I think it was a little more indicative of the topic. So if you were curious why I think console gaming is kind of ruining the PC gaming space, most of these consoles, Xbox Series X, PlayStation 5, those can be purchased for around $500 or so, and nowadays they're actually in stock. Those are consoles that can play 1440p to 4K. They've got 120 hertz options. They've got some ray tracing, cinematic options as well. They're very capable pieces of machinery for, what we would consider like a mid-range resolution, but they're only $500. If you wanted to build a similar PC that was of the same capability, I've got a video here on the channel. I think it's called like the Definitive Console Killer Guide. You've got to drop at least $800 in order to get to that grade of hardware. So if you're just getting into the gaming space, what makes more sense to purchase? Should you buy a console and just be done with it and just go have a good time? Or should you invest, extra money? Plus you got to buy monitors, you got to buy keyboards, accessories, and all that stuff. The entry point into mid-range PC gaming is still out of reach for many people, unless you already have a pre-existing PC, which you could upgrade and all that stuff, which is always a good option. on the cherry on top of that, if you're wanting to get into this mid-range PC gaming space, just as we mentioned with the VRAM segment at the beginning of the stream, if you're wanting to play 1440p reliably for the long term, it's not going to cut it with an 8 GB card anymore. You're going to need something that has like 10 GB, 12 GB, or even 16 GB. So the RX 6700 XT is kind of my go-to entry-level graphics card these days. And I really wish the 7600 that was going to be announced, hopefully in the next month, would have, you know, a 10 GB or 16 GB option, because it's really hard to sell people into 1440p PC gaming on an 8 GB VRAM graphics card. As capable as they can be, it's just for people that are like, well, the PlayStation 5 has 16 GB. Why am I buying something that doesn't have as much memory? Those are the types of conversations that are keeping people from getting into PC gaming to begin with. And on top of that, the games need that much VRAM nowadays, or you're going to see all the same stuff that we already walked through, and you'll have to watch another video of me complaining about it for the next hour or stuff. So it's like the entry point for GPUs is right around $350 for like a entry-level GPU nowadays. $200 GPUs just don't have the horsepower or the capacity to do it anymore. Going into the CPU, it's a little bit less important. The consoles only have Zen 2 based CPUs, so you can get a relatively older CPU, or if you have an upgradable PC, you know, you could just upgrade up to like a 5800X3D and probably be pretty good for a CPU perspective for quite some time. But of course, you can always upgrade and spend more money on AM5 or Z790 or whatever the next generation Intel one is. So we do get a little bit of reprieve there with the CPU requirements. But as we continue to go down that price stack of a brand new PC or a PC upgrade, the things just aren't going to cut it anymore. The really only PC hardware that's going to get knocked out from a current generation mainstream gaming perspective are older 4-core parts, and then people that are still using spinning hard drives. At this point at least, many people have moved up to solid state drives, if not NVMe drives. Those are significantly faster. They unlock better streaming rates for assets. Direct storage, or that NVIDIA thing we mentioned earlier, it's going to start popping up. So again, it's like as we start to get towards the lower stack of the PC part list, there's just not a lot of money to save, and unfortunately going with older hardware is just not a good option for most. If you're wanting to go into the used market for some of these things, that's probably a good place. But again, it's like the entry point is just so steep that to get into mainstream PC gaming, a lot of the stuff that's in the used market's just not going to be helpful. You could go down to 1 or 2 generations to get hardware, but you can't rely on the RX 580 anymore. Probably not even, I think a GTX 1080 is probably the oldest or lowest capability you'd want to go to. But otherwise, you'll want to go with an RTX 2000 series or RDNA 6000. And as I mentioned in some of these other parts lists, you're already looking at $400 graphics cards and $300 CPUs just to get you started. So let's define this crossroads that we're at as gamers in general, and kind of see what our options are going forward. So I've seen a lot of people on the internet that kind of think of mainstream gaming being defined by the consoles that are being delivered at that point, or the resolutions that the people play at. And I think we have to pick one or the other when it comes to PC gaming. If we want to stick to consoles being the base level or mainstream gaming option, that is going to increase both the cost and the capability of PCs just for getting in the door. That's effectively going to make the 7600 or the 4060 grade cards. Oh, sorry, I read that wrong. That's going to make 7500 XTs or RTX 4050 grade cards. They're basically going to be dead in the water. There's going to be no reason to buy those things because they don't have the horsepower to do the resolutions of 1440p, and they're not going to have the VRAM capacity to put out the resolutions and the textures that are needed. And that spells a pretty big question mark towards the 4060 that's going to be coming up, as well as the 7600, because unless those are solid 1440p 60 hertz gaming cards, they're going to be pretty much dead in the water as well. So that leaves what we would typically consider mid-range graphics cards, 7700s, 4070s. That's going to be your baseline entry point for a graphics cards, guys. And that is a very tough pill to swallow when it comes to being a PC gamer. I think right now 4070s are what, $500? There's not even a mid-range AMD RDNA 3 card that's been announced yet. Luckily, there is some back stock of some of their RDNA 2 and RTX 3000 stuff. But if we want to keep our standard as the consoles, you got to have the GPU horsepower to push it across the finish line. But let's say if you're on the other side and you still want to think that 1080p gaming is your baseline for being a mainstream gamer. If you take that side, there's a whole lot more hardware that's capable of that type of gameplay, even with current types of games. But you're still looking at 1080p 60 FPS cards with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Like we mentioned it earlier in the video, there's lots of 8 gigabyte cards available, but I don't know if developers are going to be wanting to develop games to fit 8 gigabyte graphics capacities anymore. I think that 1080p at 8 gigabytes of VRAM capacity, it may work, but if people are using Unreal Engine 5 and all these other newer technology-based gaming engines, those might already have 6 gigabyte floors for their VRAM capacity. So if you were wanting to run at medium settings, it's entirely possible that at 1080p, you might be running into that same issue. So we definitely need to have industry as well as developer buy-in to enable those features I mentioned earlier, like direct storage, that texture compression technology that NVIDIA is working on. PCI Gen 5 would be a huge blessing because it increases our bandwidth going between system RAM and the CPU and the GPU as well. And then we also need better ways, and the games themselves need to better manage their memory better, or we're going to have another Last of Us scenario or Hogwarts Legacy. And that's just not something that's going to be very enjoyable at 1080p, especially considering 1440p is kind of the standard when it comes to console gaming. So, in short, these past few years have shocked the system when it comes to PC gaming. Consoles have seen a huge bump in capability, but in the PC gaming space, we just really haven't seen or have been able to afford or buy that same, parallel purchase of power over the past 3 years. So hopefully the industry can pick up the pieces when it comes to COVID and both supply chain, development opportunities, as well as polishing opportunities, and hopefully start to deliver some products that make us that are in the PC master race just a bit more excited when it comes to, enjoying our PC games and these upcoming releases like Starfield and all these other cool games. We just really need access to this kind of hardware and technology to get us forward. So that's my spiel on this pivotal time we have in PC gaming. So that's what we got there. We got Agdog on the stream. Howdy, dude. How are you doing? Good to see you. I have a question to my wife real quick. I'm supposed to pick up my kids from church, and that's halfway across town, and their church ends at 7:30. So I don't know if I'm going to have time to make it there, but we'll have to wait and see. So what we'll do, I think we have the premise to start this conversation. I might have to just kick it off and do a separate upload, but I'll at least get you guys primed. We'll talk about 10 minutes on gaming handhelds versus gaming laptops, because I love PC handhelds. We got 3 on this back bench back here. And of course, I've got lots of computers and stuff. But the question I've always been asked in the comments section is, why would you want to buy such a device? Why not just build a computer or buy a much beefier type of laptop? Well, the reason for that is because sometimes we just want an ultra portable device that is relatively inexpensive. So I got a couple ideas on why you would want to have this type of a laptop. So obviously, laptops, gaming handhelds are super portable. It's really easy to go running around town with Ayaneo here. You could probably get the GPD Win 4 is really small. All of these PC handhelds are super portable, easy to put into a backpack and just get going. And laptops, of course, have been around forever. You can just throw them in your backpack, your purse, whatever, and just get going where you need to go. The thing with the desktop is you can't exactly travel with your $900 desktop. We talked about how expensive some of these consoles can be. Equivalent level of gaming hardware would be around $800, $900. So you can't just take that. You know, I go to a bunch of LAN parties and I have to lug around a big old monitor, cables, and all that stuff in my backpack. It's not exactly a mobile gaming experience. So that's why there's that's why handhelds and laptops are just so lucrative. Another cool thing about it is they're great for multi-site computing needs. That's a long way of saying I can take my handheld to my couch and just go play some games while my kids are running around doing stuff. And I can bring my laptop to a kitchen table and do what I need to do. Next, $600 to about $900 is to get a full gaming setup. You're including your monitor, your keyboard, power connectors. In some instances, you get the controller aspect of it with a handheld. Sometimes you can get a mouse with the little trackpad. For that sort of a price, mobile gaming is very accessible these days. 1080p seems to be a pretty easy standard to reach, even high refresh rate gaming. And you can hit that with most entry-level laptops, and handhelds are coming pretty darn close. And of course, it's a one type of purchase. You don't have to go out and buy, you know, monitors, monitor cables, power strips. You don't got to buy all this extra junk. Usually with a laptop, it's you buy the laptop, it comes with your charger. You could say this about the handhelds too. And you really only need to buy like a single other accessory for other types of usage. So having that type of a device is far more lucrative than, you know, going with the full PC. The last benefit of why I would rather buy a handheld or a gaming laptop is you kind of buy it once and you cry once. You know, Agdog's on stream. I'm trying to walk him through a new PC purchase. We're still trying to figure out the right GPU to buy in that thing. CPUs are $400. You don't know if you need to go with Intel or AMD, what type of cooler, what type of motherboard. With a laptop, all you need to do is just buy the one laptop that has the right GPU. I'm way oversimplifying it. But all you need to do is buy that one laptop and you're pretty much done with it. Most people use their laptops until they pretty much break or they're no longer able to play their games they want. And they're relatively disposable. You can find a place to recycle it and all that other stuff. So they're a little bit more, you know, consumable rather than the capital type mindset of a computer. So those are the reasons why I like gaming handhelds and gaming laptops. I'll probably do a dedicated video on that myself. So why the comparison? Why are we talking about it today? Well, I think it's pretty interesting because if we go and check out this video, this is produced by Jared's Tech. He actually has some lower end gaming laptops where he has performance numbers and specs for it. And a lot of this stuff lines up very similar to current generation gaming handhelds. And I think this is case in point of why you might want to pick one form factor or the other, because maybe you don't need the performance of a gaming laptop, or maybe you want something a bit bigger in order to play games on. So I wanted to walk you guys through some of these details because I think, you know, looking at them side by side, it's a pretty pretty comparable. So here we have the MSI GF63. I found it over on Amazon. This is the RTX 3050, so basically the baseline laptop, or this one's the 1650 one. $678. This is a tad more expensive than the Steam Deck. Sorry, I didn't know where it was. It's a tad bit more expensive than the Steam Deck, but it has a 1650 graphics card. Then, if you want to go with the 3050 version, it might not be the exact same one on here, but it's right around $800, $860. So that's something like the price of the AOK Zoe here. This thing is about $1,000 nowadays. You can go onto their Indiegogo and all that. So these two laptops are pretty equivalent when it comes to performance or price, but they offer completely different types of performance categories that I think is very interesting. So for the gaming handhelds, if you're not familiar, this is the Ayaneo Geek. This is a AMD Ryzen 7 6800U. It's their thin and light laptop processor, which also bundles in the graphics component into it. It calls it a APU, or an accelerated processor unit. And that way we only have to have a single little fan here with a single cooler and battery in here, and be able to play all of our games with this touchscreen interface. This type of device has about 46 watt hours of battery. It's running about a 7-inch screen. There are some that are 8 inches, and it already has the controller built in. So this is what a handheld typically has. But if you're looking for these laptops like right around here for this MSI, it's a 15.6-inch screen. So it's over twice as big as what we've got. The resolution is comparable. It's not the exact same. Much higher refresh rate monitor, much more capable processor. We'll talk about the GPU here in a bit. It's a little bit less on the storage, and I think this has about a 56 watt hour battery. So pretty comparable specs, clearly more capable than a handheld device, but we also have higher power consumption, which does require the power connection in some instances. And I think both of these devices are, pretty comparable. It's worth, talking about and going through that discussion. So let's talk results. So I was able to go through Jared's Tech's video. He does a really good job talking about the different games he's tested. I didn't go cover all of these, but he basically did a really thorough investigation to the performance. I'll post a link down in the description. But I went ahead and retested some of these same benchmarks, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Let me pull up. Since we're short on time, we're just going to go straight to this. So here's Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is running the in-game benchmark, which is still pretty good, pretty accurate, or pretty applicable to in-game gameplay. The 3050 mobile runs at about 40 watts for the GPU and is able to get 45 FPS at 1080p. It's not great, but it is running above 30 FPS, which is acceptable by entry-level PC gaming standards. The 1650 mobile, it is a little bit better, but it's not as fluid of an experience as we would hope. What really stinks for the handheld, these are the PC gaming handhelds, 27 FPS and 18 FPS depending on the power consumption you're using, and that's not ideal. But we can also run our gaming handhelds at different resolutions in order to get a graphical uplift and improve our performance. If we take that into account, our current gaming handhelds perform almost as good as an RTX 3050 mobile, and they're comparable to a higher wattage version at 1080p. So I ran this at a bunch of different games. I don't have the time right now to go through it. Far Cry 6 is very memory bandwidth limited, so it doesn't perform very well for a gaming handheld, but we get an excellent experience with the gaming laptops. Forza Horizon 5, another classic when it comes to benchmarks. We're already able to get pretty decent performance out of a gaming handheld, nearly 60 FPS. This is high detail settings. I would definitely crank it down to medium. But we're already getting a pretty decent experience. And going with the full-size mobile laptop, it's a more crisp image, but it's not much more fluid past 60 FPS. So you might not get that added benefit from that type of a device than you would from a basic handheld. Last one is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This doesn't have the low FPS numbers from Jared's text data, so I didn't provide it as well. But again, if we run our handhelds in 720p mode and if we run our handhelds at 720p mode and compare it to 1080p mode of these gaming laptops, we actually have a pretty decent comparison on our hands. But you might notice that I'm forgetting a very prominent graphics card, or a very prominent handheld device that's going to be announced tomorrow, I think. Yeah, tomorrow, the ASUS ROG Ally. Now, I did have to do a bit of digging, and I had to go and ask for some favors, but I do have I do have 3D Mark Time Spy scores for the 7840U. Now, it's not exactly indicative of in-game performance, but guys, it is within shooting distance of going up against the 1650 mobile. And judging by some of the other performance we saw today as well, we can run this particular APU at 720p or 800p, same quality settings as the mobile laptops, and be able to get equivalent performance. So guys, I think we're finally at the age where we can definitively say and give solid recommendations towards either type of device. So the TLDR on the performance, the gaming laptops are of course going to perform better, but they're not that much better. And I think some of these next generation handhelds are going to be able to get to that point where you can comfortably not use the laptop and go to a handheld device. So why do I like the gaming laptop? Well, obviously for the pros, it's got a huge screen. With the 15.6 inch screen, you're going to be able to see whatever it is you're gaming on, and you're not going to have to squint, zoom in, and all that stuff. It's going to be a much more pleasurable experience, and it's a lot more general purpose. If you need to go on the internet, or if you need to download something or write an email to somebody, much easier to do on a laptop, particularly with a built-in keyboard. One thing I despise on a handheld is trying to use the stupid on-screen software keyboard. Not fun, do not recommend. I actually recommend you pick up a Bluetooth keyboard. This is one from Ayaneo. I got it at a LAN party this past weekend. Definitely a solid keyboard. We'll probably do a review on that. Next is the laptops get decent performance out of the gate. And if you wanted to go with a gaming laptop, the last benefit of it is they have a much higher performance threshold. You can get gaming laptops that can pretty much replace your desktop, and if you're going to have to plug it in anyways, you might as well just get the best of the best. But that brings us all to the cons of the device. Prices can get pretty crazy when it comes to a gaming laptop. The ones we saw today were definitely, $600 to $900, which is similar price range as a handheld. But if you want to go into the higher end stuff, 4080s, 4070s, prices get pretty ridiculous. So, take that for what it's worth. And they, of course, require external power. If you're going to be gaming for any extended periods of time with a gaming laptop, you're going to be plugging that thing in, which means you're not really mobile. Yes, you can move it with you and stuff, but you're not going to be able to go onto a bus and play on it that way. The next thing, and one thing that most people might forget, it's very difficult to play an FPS without a mouse on a gaming laptop. So I'm always having to buy those little USB receiver things and have my mouse with me. So it's a little more cumbersome than you would hope. And again, if you're mobile, it might not be as mobile as you would hope. So that's always a benefit or a deficit as well. So when you look at a handheld, it's pretty much the exact opposite. These handhelds are purpose-built for gaming. They are literally a controller with a screen in between it and a computer behind it. So they are definitely made for gaming. And they have some really cool features. Check out some of the other videos here on the channel. And they do have a great balance of both the performance it delivers and the size of the device. Would you rather be lugging around, a 3-pound, I don't even know if this is 3-pound. Would you rather be lugging around a laptop or something that's a little bit smaller? Next, ultra portable. You can just pick it up, walk around the house with it. You don't have to lug around and get your mouse and all that stuff. So definitely benefit for the handheld. And the last thing, costs for handhelds are pretty stable. Right now, the cheapest, I'd say AAA capable gaming handheld would be the Steam Deck. That's right around $450. And I think the most expensive handheld, again, this is buying from like a Chinese company, those are around $1,200. But right now with the ASUS ROG Ally coming out and some of the other handhelds trying to stay competitive, you might be able to buy something for about $700 to $800, which is still in the same range as, some of these laptops. Now, the cons of the handheld, they're almost enough performance as a laptop, but they're still kind of, a little behind. You do have to go to low quality settings to get fluid experiences in most games, and you're having to drop down to 720p to get the best performance out of it. But as we've mentioned in several videos here on the channel, there are some compromises you can do to get a good experience, and with the smaller screen, it actually doesn't look all that bad. And of course, you do get a smaller screen. When you're gaming on a 7-inch one like this, it's pretty difficult to see some of the finer details in a game, and some games don't have the right resolution for text, so that could be a challenge as well. If you're wanting to use your gaming handheld as a portable computing device, it's not fun. Definitely don't recommend it. You'll have to be lugging around a mouse and a keyboard, maybe even a magnifying glass, so not a good idea. And last but not least, for the cons, you're going to have to compromise with a handheld device. You're going to have to lug around a not organic rectangle of a piece of thing. You're going to probably be bringing your charger around. It's not as bulky as a laptop, but there are some compromises from both ergonomics and performance, but I think it's definitely worth it. So my overall recommendations for the battle between a gaming handheld or a gaming PC or a gaming laptop, if you don't want to spend more than $800 and you're just using it for gaming, I highly recommend you guys pick up a gaming handheld. Steam Decks are super cheap these days, and with the competition gearing up with the ROG Ally, high-end PC gaming handhelds are very competitive and comparable to a mobile gaming experience. But if you've got more than $800 you want to burn and you want to play at higher resolutions or higher frame rates, or you're going to sit down in like your hotel room to game, going with a gaming laptop is a much more better investment, much more user-friendly, much more reliable in terms of how you can use it, where you can use it, much more user-friendly. But I will say, all of this will change once the Ayaneo Next 2 releases. I've got a video here on the channel where I talk about that. They're planning on putting a dedicated GPU, like a mobile-based GPU in one of these devices, and I think it totally makes sense. So definitely go and check that video out. But guys, that's all the time I have today. I have to speed across Austin to go pick up my kids. But if y'all have any comments or anything, definitely leave them down below. And if you guys like this format, definitely hit the thumbs up. It shows me that you guys liked what you were saying. But that's all I got to say about these 3 different topics today. I hope y'all have enjoyed it. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later, guys.